Most men have no idea that their struggles in love, work, and even mental health come down to one hidden issue. And the signs are not always obvious if you don't know what to look for. Your man might seem confident, successful, even charming, but you know something is off in your relationship because he shuts down the moment that emotions come up. He pushes you away when things get too serious. He refuses to open up, no matter how patient or loving you are. He over-explains his independence and reminds you he doesn't need anyone. He jokes about commitment a lot, and when things feel steady, he picks fights or gets too busy. Or maybe it looks like this. He constantly needs reassurance, but never truly believes when you tell him. He overanalyzes your words and actions, always looking for hidden rejections. Or he panics when you need space, fearing that you'll abandon him. Or maybe he sends mixed signals, all in on one day and then distant the next day. He lashes out during moments of emotional closeness to drive you back. And he cycles between craving connection and fearing betrayal. These are not just personality traits. They're all signs of deep-rooted attachment trauma, avoidant attachment style, anxious attachment style, or disorganized attachment style. And if left unchecked, it will sabotage his ability to have a healthy, loving relationship. It will keep him stuck in destructive patterns, running from commitment and avoiding real intimacy. And it will affect his health, increasing his risk of heart disease, depression, and even an early death. But here's the good news. Attachment issues are not permanent. They can be repaired. But first, you have to know what you're dealing with. That's exactly what we're covering today. I'm Adam Lane Smith, the attachment specialist, and today I'm breaking down the 7 hidden red flags of attachment trauma in men, what they mean, why they happen, and how they shape every part of his life. And stick around until the end because I'll tell you the fastest way to start fixing these patterns so that his quality of life and relationships improve. Red flag number 1. He's uncomfortable discussing feelings. One of the biggest signs of hidden attachment trauma in men is their inability to process and express emotions in a healthy way. But how that looks depends on which side of the attachment spectrum that he might be on. For avoidant men, emotions feel like a trap. He might think, if I open up, they could be used against me later. If I talk about my feelings, it gives someone else power over me. Instead of expressing emotions, they shut down, they deflect, or they dismiss them entirely. He changes the subject when deep conversations start. He minimizes your emotions. You're overreacting. He intellectualizes everything to avoid vulnerability. He physically removes himself from emotional situations. Here's the science behind this reaction. Avoidant men typically have very low oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and high cortisol response, that stress response, when it comes to intimacy. Oxytocin, that bonding hormone, is critical for feeling safe and bonded in emotional connections, but avoidant men often don't produce it efficiently in relational settings. Instead, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, overreacts to emotional closeness, the same way it would respond to danger or a threat. This triggers the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight instinct, releasing cortisol and adrenaline into his system, which makes him feel overwhelmed and need to escape. Now, this goes back to his childhood. He was not taught how to have or express or share those emotions in a productive way. Maybe his caregivers shut down his feelings and said they weren't welcome. Maybe they punished him for feeling the wrong things. Maybe they punished each other in front of him for having the wrong feelings, and he saw that and learned never to open up and connect. Maybe somebody else was so overly emotional, it exhausted and drained him trying to manage their feelings for them. These childhood experiences caused him to pull away from those intimate relationships because the only thing he's experienced there is not joy or pleasure or safety, but pain. This has shaped his biology now to respond to emotional closeness as a threat. Neglect, punishment for expressing feelings, all of those are still playing out inside his system. As a result, he's learned that feelings are a risk. Closeness is pain. Vulnerability is weakness. Now, for anxiously attached men, it's the opposite problem. Instead of avoiding emotions, anxious men tend to overwhelm themselves and their partners with their emotional response. He might seek constant validation, asking things like, "Are we okay? Do you still love me?" He might have intense emotional swings, especially when he's feeling insecure. "I just need you to tell me that we're doing okay right now. That's all." The science behind this is that anxiously attached men also have an overactive amygdala, meaning their fear response is heightened. They are constantly scanning for fears of rejection and abandonment in their environment. This triggers an intense cortisol spike, creating panic and desperation for emotional reassurance. When their partner pulls away, even briefly, their brain interprets it as abandonment and danger, releasing even more stress hormones. The result? They cling harder in an attempt to restore safety. But this only increases their partner's desperate need for space, which worsens the cycle. Their nervous system is wired for hyper alertness, constantly expecting rejection, betrayal, or loss. Now, the childhood experiences that shape this fear of abandonment is an inconsistent caregiver who gives love and nurturing and bonding, then pulls away. And the child desperately tries to get their approval and fawn and give connection to that person and beg, hoping to get their need met to be reconnected with. And occasionally they will reconnect with the child, giving them an intermittent reinforcement. The same mechanism that causes gambling addiction. That person is now primed to believe, I can push buttons through kindness and through love and intimacy and give, and eventually I will get a payout. I just have to keep pushing. If I just do good enough, eventually they come back to me. That intermittent reinforcement and the emotional impermanence from inconsistent caregiving and past relationship trauma has shaped his biology. Emotional impermanence is when his brain says, you're not right in front of me giving me that love and that connection, and so I can't see it and feel it, so it must not be real. You are somewhere else, and you could be losing love for me right now. His brain is wired for this. Disorganized men, the blend of anxious and avoidant, especially loud disorganized men, experience emotional whiplash back and forth. They deeply crave closeness, but the moment they get it, their system panics and tells them to run. One moment, they're emotionally intense, opening up quickly, oversharing, forming deep bonds at record speed. I hate to say it, but these are usually people who believe in soulmates and twin flames quite often, and they'll have a different soulmate every other month. The next moment, they feel exposed, overwhelmed, and shut down, completely leaving their partner cold, confused, and hurt. Now, these individuals grew up in an environment where love and danger coexisted. As children, they experienced both comfort and fear from their caregivers. The very people meant to protect them were also a source of pain. Heavy level trauma, enough that their attachment broke twice. This causes their nervous system to send mixed signals about relationships. They are both their salvation and their damnation at the same time. Now, the science behind their behavior. Their nervous system is caught between hyperactivation and total shutdown. When they feel connection, their fear response from their amygdala kicks in, causing cortisol spikes that make them emotionally overwhelmed. Instead of regulating their emotions, they swing between seeking closeness, anxious behavior, and avoiding it, avoidant behavior. Their brain struggles to associate love with safety at all. They'll immerse in it, but the moment that immersion and pleasure pauses, fear sets in. Unlike securely attached individuals, they don't have a clear internal model of what a healthy love should feel like. This creates constant emotional chaos, leading them to question their feelings, question their partner's intentions, and even question the relationship itself constantly. And they misinterpret emotional intensity as love. Because their brain equates relationships with instability, they might seek drama, chaos, or emotional highs and lows as a sign of passion. And they're used to chaos, so they also just accept it. So whenever a partner comes in with the most outlandish requirements or problems or baggage, they just accept it. And if things ever feel too stable, their nervous system defaults to crisis mode, saying something awful is coming, creating unnecessary conflict or withdrawing suddenly. This means that even when they love their partner deeply, their instinct to protect themselves from harm causes them to behave in ways that damage the very relationship that they want to keep. Now, how does this affect the relationships? These three attachment styles create communication breakdowns because none of them feel comfortable navigating emotionally charged situations calmly. together with a partner. Emotional regulation does not come naturally for men with attachment trauma. It does. It's something that has to be worked on together and trained into you as a child, as a young child, a late child, a teen, and then late teens into adulthood. Your parents should be training you in how to manage your emotions. They should also be co-regulating with you about 30% and easing out of co-regulation so that you are self-regulating. Social conditioning in our culture also tells men emotions are weak. Emotions are unacceptable. Being emotional is no longer okay. You are not supposed to feel anything. It's due to this that they probably never saw emotional regulation modeled. So they have to carry these dysfunctional patterns through to adulthood. And breaking that cycle requires rewiring their entire biology so that they no longer respond to emotions as threats. Cortisol, which is released when they're stressed, when confronted with emotionally charged situations, it blocks oxytocin production, by the way, and makes it hard for them to feel connected emotionally to their partners. So what's the outcome if this is not addressed? Well, for avoidant men, they will continue to sabotage their own relationships, thinking that they just haven't met the right person yet. An avoidant man will convince himself that his inability to connect is due to choosing the wrong partner, rather than recognizing his own deep-seated fear of intimacy. He will cycle through relationships, feeling relief when he gains distance and suffocated when closeness builds again. In his mind, emotional intimacy equals loss of freedom, and the moment he feels pressure, he will begin withdrawing. Now, his partner, sensing that distance, will try harder to connect, which will trigger his need to escape. This pattern creates confusion and heartbreak for his partner, who feels rejected and unloved despite their best efforts. Over time, he might resign himself to loneliness, convincing himself that relationships are just too complicated and that he's better off alone, or he might just keep cycling until he's in his 50s and 60s and says, "Why have I never found the one person I was supposed to settle down with?" Now, by contrast, anxious men will continue to overwhelm their partners, pushing them away while desperately trying to hold on. An anxiously attached man will live in a constant state of emotional hypervigilance, scanning for signs that his partner is losing interest. Every delay in response, every shift in tone, every moment of space will be interpreted as a threat to the relationship. His brain floods with cortisol. His thoughts spiral into worst-case scenarios, and he responds by clinging harder and demanding more reassurance, testing loyalty, or even emotionally overloading his partner. This intensity can feel overwhelming, causing his partner to pull away in self-protection, which in turn confirms his worst fear, that he's not truly loved. The relationship becomes an exhausting cycle of pursuit and retreat, leaving both partners feeling misunderstood and emotionally drained. Now, a disorganized man will live in a paradox, desperately wanting love, but fearing it in equal measure. He will swing between emotional extremes, pulling his partner in with intensity one moment and then shutting down or even lashing out the next. His partner will feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of him they'll get. One day he's all in, promising commitment and devotion. The next, he's cold, distant, and unreachable. His unpredictable behavior creates an unstable relationship dynamic that mirrors the chaos of his early life. Without intervention, he will continue reinforcing the belief that love is dangerous, that people can't be trusted, and that he's doomed to repeat the same pattern cycle indefinitely. Now, all of these men, if left unchecked, will continue to live in cycles of disconnection, isolation, and frustration, never truly feeling fulfilled or safe. But here's the good news. Emotional regulation is a learned skill. We are supposed to be regulating about 70% ourselves and about 30% through family, friends, partners. This means each of us, biologically, has control of about 70% of our own emotional experience. And that other 30%, we can cultivate the best relationships to help us co-regulate appropriately. Now, once these men in these relationships are appropriately self-regulating, they can come together with their partner and co-regulate, which creates the release of vasopressin bonding as they solve a problem together. It also helps them to oxytocin bond as they feel loved and cared for, and that helps to strengthen the shared emotional experience between them. And men who actively work on rewiring their attachment style can do a few key things. First, they can develop emotional intimacy without feeling exposed or in danger. They can learn self-regulation techniques so they don't shut down or panic. They can stay calm in themselves and control their own emotions. And they can create relationships that feel safe, connected, and fulfilling. Make sure you stay to the end of the video where I will share the fastest way for us to do that. Red flag number 2, he handles conflict poorly. Conflict is inevitable in any relationship, but for men with hidden attachment trauma, it's a threat to their nervous system. Now, our nervous systems were developed in the times of hunter-gatherer structures, where men were facing regular existential level threats quite often. They might have to go out and hunt with wild animals around, or vicious other tribes that would take from them or kill them. They ongoing had daily frustrations and stressors that were actually life and death. So our system can recognize life and death. It's designed for that, to keep us safe. But keep in mind that early infant traumas create what feels like life and death struggles inside of relationships that are otherwise safe and peaceful. This means your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a disagreement with a partner and a tiger running at you to eat you. Your system doesn't recognize that difference because they are tagged the same from the attachment trauma. Instead of seeing conflict as a chance to resolve problems then, and vasopressin bond, these men react as if they are under attack. Now, the cycle of hormones going on at a biological level is this. Conflict causes stress. Stress is that cortisol feeling spiking through your system, which blocks good hormones from taking effect, like oxytocin. It shifts you into your sympathetic nervous system and blocks serotonin production as well. So oxytocin and serotonin, gone. GABA, gone. GABA suppresses cortisol. You need that gone during intense moments of fight or flight. Instead, all you have is ongoing cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. That helps him feel stronger to fight and flee, but it does not help him work through conflict in a productive way. It helps him work through conflict by waving a pointy stick at the threat and then spearing it if it comes too close. And that's what a lot of these men will do in a conflicting setting. For avoidant men, conflict is dangerous, overwhelming, and something to be escaped when possible. Instead of engaging, they shut down completely. No eye contact, no response. They stonewall. They act like the conversation isn't happening, or they just repeat one phrase over and over and over. They disappear for hours or days. They go radio silent to just cool off, or they use dismissive language. You're overreacting. This isn't a big deal. To them, they have to shut down conflict because conflict is emotional exposure, and emotional exposure feels like danger. So their only defense is to shut down, withdraw, or pretend the issue doesn't exist. And if you refuse to let that happen, now they go into fight mode to drive you away, to give themselves the space to retreat away from the threat. Here's what's really going on below the surface, though. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting danger and triggering fight or flight responses, in avoidant men, that amygdala is hypersensitive to emotional intensity, meaning that conflict activates the same fear response as a physical threat, a tiger. You having emotions activates fear and danger. Instead of seeing conflict as an opportunity to problem solve together, their brain goes into full defensive mode. The prefrontal cortex, which controls logic, emotional regulation, and decision-making, temporarily shuts down during this stress mode. This makes it nearly impossible for them to engage rationally in an argument with you. They literally lose access to that clear, logical brain. They can pull pieces out of it to then filter through the emotional brain and blast you to shut you down, but they can't have a calm, detached conversation. They'll think that they are. They will think that they are calmly logical and peaceful, but you know that they're not. You can see the agitation, and it's filtering illogically through the emotional fear brain. That's why avoidant men struggle to explain their emotions or needs or anything during a conflict. Their brain won't let them. It is shutting you down on purpose. Now, cortisol, the stress hormone, spikes dramatically during emotionally charged situations. In securely attached men, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, helps counteract that cortisol by flooding with GABA. GABA suppresses cortisol and then makes it harder to release cortisol. That keeps them calm and engaged in conflict resolution because they have a much longer fuse that they have to burn through before they reach this level of stress. But in avoidant men, oxytocin release is blunted because they have almost no GABA from almost no cortisol. Oxytocin flows, it's instantly there, and they spike 0 to 100, meaning that cortisol goes fully unchecked, making them feel trapped, overwhelmed, and desperate to escape. When conflict occurs, their sympathetic nervous system, which controls stress response, goes into overdrive. That sympathetic nervous system raises heart rate and blood pressure to prepare for danger, which is why avoidant men may feel hot, restless, or lightheaded during conflict. Some might experience a tightened chest, a shortness of breath, even nausea, because their body is literally preparing to battle or escape. The central nervous system also releases adrenaline, making them feel jittery, tense, or on edge. They can't stop. They're bouncing a leg. They're vibrating in place. This reinforces their instinct to leave the situation because his body is telling him, get out, escape. If they stay in conflict for too long, they experience emotional shutdown, also known as dorsal vagal collapse, where they go numb and completely disengage. This is why it's so hard for an avoidant man to physically remain present in a conflict situation. Now, with anxious men, a little bit different. They react to conflict from a place of deep fear of abandonment. Instead of discussing the issue, they panic and over-apologize. They beg for forgiveness, even if they did nothing wrong. They cling harder, refusing to let the conversation end until they fix things. To them, conflict equals danger, specifically danger to the relationship, which becomes personal danger. So their only defense is to fight to keep the connection alive. But fighting in this case looks like pleasing, pushing, apologizing, clinging harder. But clinging doesn't fix the problem. It just overwhelms their partner and pushes them further away. Anxious men don't just struggle with conflict. They experience full-blown nervous system crisis whenever their relationship feels unstable. Conflict doesn't trigger the flight response in them like it does for avoidant men because running away would actually make the problem worse. That is their fear. Instead, it activates their attachment panic, sending them into a fight or fawn mode, desperately trying to hold on to connection at all costs. Their brain treats an argument like an emergency, even when no real danger exists. Now, in anxious men, they release excessive cortisol and adrenaline during relationship stress. This results in emotional flooding, which makes it very difficult for them to think. Again, the prefrontal cortex, and it makes it hard to regulate their emotions or even act rationally. Conflict makes them feel instantly overwhelmed, leading to emotional outbursts, panic, or excessive reassurance seeking. Instead of resolving the issue, they spiral into fear and become desperate to restore closeness. Anxious men rely on external validation for emotional stability, meaning that their brain depends on their partner's reassurance to feel safe. When conflict occurs, oxytocin, that bonding hormone that makes you feel safe, drops, triggering withdrawal symptoms similar to drug addiction. And their dopamine reward system crashes, making them feel panicked, insecure, and desperate to reconnect. They experience real chemical withdrawal symptoms when their partner is emotionally distant. Their brain demands immediate reassurance to restore oxytocin levels and calm their nervous system. Their sympathetic nervous system kicks in, causing rapid heart rate, shallow breathing, and jittery sensations. This is because their body is preparing to fight for connection, not escape like an avoidant man would. Their body prepares for action, making them feel fidgety, restless, or unable to sit still. This is why anxious men physically struggle to let an argument end. Their body won't let them relax till the conflict is resolved. So when the other person tries to walk away, they can't let that happen or they will die. That's what their brain is saying. Their nervous system is in a full-blown panic mode, making it impossible to disengage from the argument. This is why anxious men struggle to give space. Their body physically won't let them. Disorganized men experience the worst of both worlds when it comes to conflict. Their nervous system doesn't have a single default response. It flips unpredictably between avoidance and panic. This makes their reactions feel inconsistent, erratic, and sometimes even explosive. This has given rise to the idea that disorganized men just don't care, they're hurtful, and they're not. They are panicked most of the time, back and forth. What does this look like for a disorganized man in particular? Well, one day he will aggressively fight to win an argument, and the next he disappears and refuses to engage at all. He might swing between intense emotional outbursts and total emotional shutdown. He may suddenly escalate conflicts over minor issues, as if a small disagreement threatens his entire sense of security. He reacts as if he's both being abandoned and trapped at the same time. Here's what's happening internally with a disorganized man. His attachment system is stuck in both hyperarousal, panic and fight, and hypoarousal, shutdown and avoidance. His nervous system can't decide if conflict is a threat that must be confronted or escaped. And his amygdala, his fear center, overreacts to conflict, making him feel under attack, just like an anxious man. But at the same time, his prefrontal cortex, that logical thinking and regulation center, is impaired, just like an avoidant man. His cortisol levels spike rapidly, making him highly reactive. But instead of having a single pattern of response, like an avoidant man, his system swings wildly. One moment, he's in a fight response, defense, aggressive, accusatory. The next, he's in flight, distant, withdrawn, shut down. Unlike avoidant men who detach and anxious men who chase, a disorganized man does both, unpredictably. He might demand closeness one second and push his partner away the next, which makes arguments chaotic and difficult to resolve. This reaction is a trauma response. Their brain has learned that emotional closeness is both desirable and dangerous. So when conflict happens, their limbic system, the emotional brain, launches into survival mode, unable to determine the safest course of action. Now, how does this affect relationships? Well, conflict is not the problem. The problem is how a man reacts to conflict, because in all three attachment styles, cooperation is not something they believe is possible. They have never seen healthy conflict resolution modeled, so they don't know that it exists. But I want to tell you right now that conflict resolution skills can be practiced. In fact, that's how everybody learns them from childhood. You didn't, and it's time to learn them. And it is possible for these people to learn to navigate conflict calmly. I will tell you how to do that at the end of this video. Red flag number 3, he doesn't ask for his needs to be met. Every healthy relationship requires give and take, where both partners feel safe expressing their needs and having those needs met. But for men with hidden attachment trauma, expressing any kind of need feels impossible. For avoidant men, having needs feels like weakness. Instead of asking for what they need, they convince themselves they don't have needs at all, pretending they're totally self-sufficient. They downplay their struggles even when they're drowning in stress, and they refuse emotional support, even when it's freely offered. At first, this might look like self-reliance or a stoic personality, but in reality, it's a deeply ingrained avoidance of emotional vulnerability and appearing weak. So they build an identity around never needing anything from anyone. The protective mechanisms they used to protect themselves in childhood become unsustainable in adult relationships. Now, I want to make it very clear, highly ethical avoidant people in particular do want a close connection, but they don't know how to go about it. And most of them have no idea what support or care could even be offered from another human being because they've never had someone meet their needs before. This is a very key distinction for a relationship that could work versus one where a person is absolutely refusing to ever let you in, period, even though they know what things are available. A little bit different there. Anxious men, though, have needs. They're a little bit different, but they're too afraid to ask for them because of insecurity and fear of abandonment. Instead of expressing their needs, they suppress their emotions, bottling everything up till it explodes. They drop hints instead of directly asking them to get met. Then they get frustrated when their partner doesn't pick up on those hints. Then over time, they begin to resent their partner for not anticipating their needs, even though they never voiced them. The more they suppress their needs, the more their resentment builds until it turns into passive-aggressive behavior, emotional outbursts, or even deep dissatisfaction in their relationship. The nurturing anxious here, in particular, is less likely to do this than the toxic anxious, who's likely to launch into this very quickly. But the nurturing anxious partner still, they want their relationship to work, but they have no clue how to go about building that. They feel like their needs are burdens and will cause the other person to feel overwhelmed and leave, so they keep it inside as a form of protecting the relationship. It still doesn't go well, and that still needs to be corrected to build a healthy relationship. Disorganized men struggle with both fearing their needs won't be met and fearing what will happen if they do depend on someone. It's the worst of both worlds. Instead of confidently asking for what they need, they feel ashamed of needing support at all. But they also feel resentful when their partner doesn't automatically know what they need. They test a partner's love by creating distance, then panic when that distance feels too real. Now, how does all of this affect relationships? Well, relationships with this pattern will always feel unfulfilling because the avoidant man never learns to allow himself to receive love fully, and they shut their partners out. The anxious man never feels like he's loved enough, and he makes their partner feel like they're falling short even when they're trying their best. And the disorganized man craves love, but pushes it away out of fear, leaving partners exhausted and trying to guess what they need. This doesn't work. Wherever your partner falls on the insecure attachment spectrum, anxious, avoidant, disorganized, constantly sacrificing your needs to stress, resentment, and all of this emotional dysregulation puts enormous strain on you psychologically and physically. Red flag number 4. He's highly physical in relationships, but struggles with emotional intimacy. A man with hidden attachment trauma often looks highly confident in relationships. He may be physically affectionate, sexually active, may even seem passionate in the moment, but when it comes to deep emotional intimacy, especially outside the bedroom, he shuts down. He avoids real vulnerability. He doesn't open up about his true thoughts and feelings. This creates a huge disconnect between physical intimacy and emotional connection. For avoidant men, sex is easy. Vulnerability is terrifying. They use physical touch as a way to bond without having to deal with messy emotions. Instead of expressing love through words or deep connections, they focus on sex because it feels safer. Avoidant men don't know how to connect through emotional bonding. But sex triggers dopamine. That's the chemical that gives them a short-term high without triggering deep emotional vulnerability. It's a biological shortcut to connection without the risk of real intimacy. This is why many avoidant men pull away after sex, not because they don't enjoy the act, but because the post-intimacy oxytocin flood triggers their fears. To them, again, emotional closeness equals losing control. For anxious men, on the other hand, sex is about proving their worth, and it's a reward at the same time. They seek out physical intimacy because it provides temporary relief from their deep-seated fear of rejection. Instead of genuinely connecting, they use sex as a way to earn love, believing that physical affection equals emotional security. Anxious men feel extreme fear if their partner isn't physically affectionate. They're assuming that means they're losing love because they rely on external validation to feel secure in relationships. And because they don't fully trust that they deserve their partner's love, they seek constant reassurance through physical touch. For disorganized men, sex is both a craving and a trigger. They deeply desire emotional and physical closeness, but they fear what will happen if they let their guard down. Instead of developing healthy intimacy, they use sex as a test of safety. If their partner engages, it temporarily soothes their fear of abandonment, sure. And if their partner hesitates, it confirms their worst fear, that love isn't safe. And their partner can't always engage immediately to make them feel better. That's why neither one works. Their trauma really has wired them to crave attachment and connection while fearing its consequences. The oxytocin released during sex makes them feel bonded, but that very closeness then floods them with terror because in the past, love was unpredictable, conditional, even dangerous. Now, how does all this affect relationships? Well, sex is one of the most powerful dopamine-releasing activities that a human can experience. It provides an intense neurochemical reward, triggering a flood of dopamine, but also, hopefully, oxytocin for bonding, and a host of other bonding chemicals as well that feel great. For securely attached men, sex enhances the bonding. It enhances the connection, and it enhances the intimacy that's already there. The dopamine then works in harmony with the oxytocin to just reinforce the emotional closeness. It's not the main feast. But for men with attachment trauma, the relationship between dopamine and sex becomes dysfunctional and reinforces unhealthy relationship patterns. Dopamine is the brain's primary reward chemical. It drives motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement. During sex, dopamine spikes dramatically, creating an intense sense of reward and pleasure. But high dopamine release creates a reward-seeking loop. The stronger the dopamine hit is, the more the brain seeks out of the same experience again next time. This is why people who use sex to self-soothe or chase that high, instead of seeking deeper emotional connection, have to seek deeper physical experiences. But for men with attachment trauma, This rush affects them differently. After that dopamine rush of sex fades, both avoidant and anxious men struggle, but in opposite ways. Avoidant men feel suffocated and may push their partner away. Anxious men feel abandoned and try to pull their partner closer. Disorganized men blow hot and cold different times back and forth, leaving their partner confused and sometimes emotionally wounded. The only way out of this is to build secure attachment. Please stick with me through the rest of this video because I'm going to show you how to fix this at the end of this video. Red flag number 5, he's insecure about his partner's loyalty. A man with hidden attachment trauma may never fully trust that his partner is loyal, even if she's never given him a single reason to doubt her. He tests her, he pushes her, or he constantly questions where he stands. He feels on edge, he's always waiting for the moment she'll leave or betray him, and he either micromanages her behavior or he withdraws entirely to avoid getting hurt. An avoidant man may act like he doesn't care, but underneath his cool, detached exterior is a deep-rooted fear of betrayal. Instead of expressing this fear outright, he'll do a couple of damaging things. He might push his partner away just to see if she comes back. He might pick fights or create distance just to test her commitment. He might downplay his emotions and act indifferent, even when he really does care a lot. It's not that he doesn't want love. I want to be clear on that. It's that his past experiences have taught him that people leave, usually painfully and brutally. So his brain is wired to expect that betrayal. And because of this, he tests his partner's loyalty constantly, waiting for the moment she confirms his worst fears. He thinks he's staying in control, but in reality, he's creating the very instability that he fears. The cycle here of the push-pull back and forth is exactly what leads to the breakdown in trust and causes the other person to start to question the relationship. It is so much worse when the avoidant man's in a relationship with an anxiously attached woman who perceives his constant testing as signs that she is not good enough. It's him every day saying, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. He thinks he's testing loyalty. Her panic is spiraling out of control, and she's constantly rushing to try to reassure him that he is. Now, over time, as she's exhausted and burned out, she begins to need more co-regulation from him, which is going to make him feel threatened and endangered with more pressure, which then will make her feel resentful that he's been emotionally torturing her, from her perspective, and now also starving her and refusing to help her make up for the damage he's done. This is that push-pull dynamic that will actually drive her away from him, creating a system where she thinks he hates her, so she leaves, and he says, another betrayal. Now, anxious men, in the other direction, crave constant reassurance because their nervous system never, ever feels fully secure in love. Even when their partner's loyal, devoted, and has never done anything to betray them, an anxious man will still worry about her leaving. He reads too much into small things, like, why did she like that guy's photo on Instagram? He gets anxious if she's busy or needs space. Is she pulling away from me? He needs constant validation. Do you still love me? Are we okay? Do you promise? And if he doesn't get that immediate reassurance, he spirals into imagining all the worst case scenarios. This is not him doubting her quality as a person or her morals or character. It's actually him believing he is not worthy of faithfulness. So he's constantly scanning for the moment that his fears are proven true. Even a slight change in tone, a delayed text, or a normal period of space can send him into a full-blown panic because of this. He's not just needy. His brain is in a state of panic every time he feels emotionally uncertain. At the core, an anxiously attached man does not feel worthy of his partner's loyalty. So he's constantly wondering, who is going to take her away from me? Or who will she leave me for? Now, for the disorganized man, trust is a paradox. They want to believe in loyalty, but their nervous system won't let them. Instead of experiencing a consistent fear response like an avoidant or an anxious man, they oscillate between paranoia and detachment. One moment they are hyper-vigilant, scanning for betrayal, and the next they emotionally shut down to avoid feeling the fear. They might preemptively betray their partner. They may flirt with others, entertain past relationships, or engage in destructive behaviors as a twisted form of self-protection. Sort of like, you can't fire me because I quit. Let me prove to myself how much control I have in this relationship. You can't stop me. Oh no, what have I done? That's usually the follow-up. And they may overcorrect between extremes, accusing their partner of disloyalty one day, then withdrawing completely the next to punish themselves even for overreacting. Now, here's how this affects your relationships. No matter how much love, commitment, or reassurance a partner gives, it is never enough to convince these men of the loyalty. Anxiously attached people chronically feel undeserving of someone's love and loyalty. That does not go away in this case. Avoidant men don't trust, no matter how loyal their partner is. They are poised on the edge, waiting for the moment they get betrayed. Both of these approaches slowly erode the relationship and push partners away for different reasons, but they destroy the relationship nonetheless. And in relationships with disorganized men, the partner feels emotionally whiplashed, never knowing what version of him they'll get. Disorganized men create the very betrayal they fear, pushing their partner so hard that she eventually leaves just to escape the chaos. Instead of building trust, they destroy it through sabotage, then blame themselves for being unlovable. Red flag number 6, escapist behavior. Some men don't deal with anything effectively. They just escape. And these behaviors are not just hobbies or habits. They're coping mechanisms for attachment trauma. They work very, very late every night, avoiding their home life, the workaholism, especially of avoidant men. They disappear into video games or endless scrolling on social media, very, very likely for anxious men. They drink, they binge watch TV, they gamble, or they use porn to numb out. Very constant and likely for disorganized men. It doesn't always look destructive from the outside, at least at first. Some men are highly successful. They seem highly disciplined, and they seem incredibly productive, but they're still running away because their nervous system never feels enough peace to rest. Avoidant men don't process their emotions at all. They escape from them. They have no idea how to handle stress, disappointment, or vulnerability. So instead of dealing with it, they bury themselves in distractions. Dopamine becomes his drug. He's constantly seeking new projects, new thrills, or anything that stops him from being alone with his thoughts. Instead of leaning into emotional connection during stressful times to co-regulate like a securely attached man would, his brain seeks dopamine instead. That fast, instant reward chemical that makes him feel temporarily good, but never truly satisfied. They run from connection because they don't know how to sit with discomfort. In the past, discomfort was a danger signal that compelled them to take action. Now, it feels painful to sit in discomfort and not act because it means they're allowing danger to draw ever closer without taking precautions. And the biggest danger is that one day they wake up and realize they've built a life that they can't feel. Anxious men, on the other hand, don't avoid emotions. Not entirely. But instead of dealing with their emotions in a healthy way, they self-soothe with distractions that make them feel better in the moment. They don't necessarily look highly functional like most avoidant men do because they're not usually workaholics. Instead, they tend to fall into patterns of procrastination, distraction, and emotional burnout because their nervous system is always on edge. For disorganized men, they don't just run from their emotions like avoidant men or self-soothe with distractions like anxious men. They do both, but in unpredictable cycles that usually causes massive chaos in their life. One day, they're hyper-present. They're drowning in work, hobbies, and self-improvement, pushing in every area of life, working 18 hours a day. They convince themselves they can fix their pain through achievement. Then the next moment, they disappear entirely. They shut down, they dissociate, or they fall into self-destructive behaviors to numb out completely. They swing between extremes, unable to find balance. When they're engaged, they overfunction. When they're overwhelmed, they collapse. The root of this is their nervous system never learning how to handle distress in a stable way. Now, this is going to affect your relationships in some very key ways because none of these attachment styles actually processes their emotions. They just postpone them by hitting pause indefinitely. All three leave their partner feeling disconnected, unseen, and unimportant. And the longer that they escape, the harder it becomes to actually connect with the people who love them. So here's how to break the pattern of escapist behavior. Escapist behavior is a survival mechanism. It's what men with attachment trauma do when their nervous system can't handle stress, intimacy, or emotional discomfort. They run, they numb out, or they distract themselves, but the problem won't go away. It just builds. But escapism is a habit. And just like any habit, it can be broken. Here's a couple things you can try. First thing I recommend is set some daily goals. Escapism thrives on passivity, letting the hours slip away in distractions. The first step to breaking it is intentional engagements every day. Start small and set one daily goal that forces real-world engagement in the opposite direction. As an example, have a real conversation with a friend or go for a walk without your phone. Second thing to do is build a new dopamine system. Most escapist habits are dopamine driven, especially in modern day. They offer quick pleasure, but no real fulfillment. The fix for this is replacing those destructive dopamine sources with constructive ones. You might swap shallow dopamine hits like social media, porn, overworking for deep dopamine rewards. For example, moving toward hobbies that require effort, like working out, learning an instrument, building something. These real-life dopamine rewards create satisfaction instead of the endless craving cycle that comes from escapism. They also might start triggering some serotonin release for you as well, which is going to long-term stabilize your mood and help you feel better, and then begin having conversations in a calmer way. Next thing to do is to reconnect with real people. Many men escape because they feel disconnected, but real human connection done right actually helps regulate that nervous system. Again, the co-regulation. As an example, check in with a friend at least once a week. Join a structured group, sports, mastermind groups, faith-based groups, something that requires regular in-person engagement. And then face-to-face connection. That rewires your brain to rely on relationships instead of escapist habits. And the last thing to do for this is create a hard reset ritual for overwhelming days. Some days the urge to escape is just too strong. So instead of fighting it, redirect it. Have a reset plan, maybe a 20-minute workout or cold exposure, for example, before engaging in anything else. Or change your environment. If escapism is strongest at home, you might need to leave the house for a while, work from a coffee shop, take a drive, walk outside. Physically shifting your state massively interrupts the escape cycle and can help reset your brain. Red flag number 7, he lacks deep male friendships. Most men have friends, but how many of those friendships go beyond surface level conversations? Does he have anyone he can fully confide in? Does he have male friends he trusts with his struggles, his fears, and his emotions? Or is every conversation about sports, work, and casual small talk? Because a man's ability to connect with other men is one of the clearest signs of his emotional health. Avoidant men might have plenty of acquaintances, people they see at the gym, colleagues they joke around with, or even a longtime group of buddies they meet up with occasionally, but they don't share their challenges or their problems. They don't talk about personal issues. Their friendships are transactional and pleasure-driven, not relational. They revolve around shared activities like drinking, working out, business networking, or watching sports. But if something goes wrong in their life, they don't confide in their friends because they've internalized the belief that emotional support is weakness. And as a result, they've built walls instead of relationships. And no matter how independent he seems, an avoidant man without true friendships is a man who's slowly burning out. Anxious men struggle to form meaningful friendships with other men, not because they don't want them, but because their attachment wounds make it difficult to. They fear rejection, so they hesitate to put themselves out there. They overanalyze social interactions, often wondering if they said the wrong thing afterward, obsessing over it. They struggle with self-confidence, so they either isolate themselves or overly adapt to fit in. As a result, they avoid male friendships entirely or struggle to maintain them, leading to deep feelings of loneliness and social exclusion. For disorganized men, male friendships are both deeply craved and intensely feared. They don't trust stability because they've learned that people who get close eventually hurt them, so they abandon them or they turn against them. Their friendships tend to mirror their romantic relationships, a chaotic cycle of closeness followed by sudden distance over and over and over. Why? Because their nervous system is wired for unpredictability. Growing up, their relationships were not a safe space for them. They were a source of confusion, fear, or pain. So they never learn that consistent male support is possible. And their brain assumes it's only a matter of time before their friendships fall apart. Now, all of this will affect your relationship because without healthy male friendships, neither the anxious, the disorganized, or avoidant man has an external emotional support system to help them co-regulate and process stress and find solutions, which can put enormous strain on the romantic relationship. Men who lack deep friendships are often significantly more likely to experience depression, anxiety, even early death. Because no man is an island and nobody can build a truly secure, fulfilling life alone. Now, if you're seeing these signs in the man that you love, it can be hard to watch, especially when you don't know how to help him. These destructive patterns are wired into his nervous system, shaping every reaction, every decision, every relationship. And while it's not his fault, if nothing changes, here's what will happen. He'll keep shutting down when things get tough. He'll keep running from the love that he actually craves. He'll keep sabotaging the connection with you without knowing why. And you will never build the relationship you've always wanted to have with him. But attachment wounds are not permanent. They can be healed, but not through books, not through therapy, not through just trying harder. Most men don't learn emotional health by sitting in a therapist's office talking about their childhood. They don't learn it from self-help videos that feel disconnected from real life. Most men learn best through direct hands-on experience, practical training that rewires their old responses, real scenarios where they can learn to respond differently and live in the moment. Now, I've made my career over the last 16 years helping people, giving them practical solutions for their relationship and psychology issues. This is why I've become the attachment specialist to help people around the world build real, honest, direct solutions that work. This is why my methods have a 99.8% success rate. I know that practical hands-on experience is a must if you want to help anybody, especially men, to really change their behavior patterns, understand what the difference is and how to do it, and then move forward into those solutions and those great relationships. I know this is mandatory, and that's exactly what my attachment immersion retreat is designed to do. Over the course of this intensive, high-impact experience, I will personally train you, or you and your partner together, to rewire old patterns through immersive simulated exercises that teach real-world emotional regulation, to break the fight, flight, or freeze cycle and handle emotionally charged situations with confidence, to navigate conflict, boundaries, and emotional connection in a way that feels secure and natural, and to finally experience peace instead of feeling like relationships are constant tension, frustration, and uncertainty. This retreat is practical, hands-on training for real-life relationships. We simulate real scenarios where you can practice exactly how to handle them before they happen in the real world. I will guide you through every step, showing you exactly how to do it, and you will feel the impact immediately, so you will know that these methods work. If you have ever felt trapped in the same painful cycles and thought, I don't know how to fix this, this is where you will learn how. This retreat condenses months of personal growth into a powerful, high-impact transformation. If you've ever wanted a way out of your patterns, this is it. Click the link below to learn more and reserve your spot today. There are only 10 tickets left, so if you're serious about breaking these cycles, I invite you to act now. I'm Adam Lane Smith, the attachment specialist. Thank you for sharing this time with me today. If this was helpful, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and share this video with your partner if it's helpful to them. I want them to have this information so they can understand what's going on in their own life and their own behavior patterns. And again, if you would love to join us at the retreat, please reach out. support@adamlanesmith.com is a great place to email me or click the link below and we'll get in touch.